It's my pleasure to introduce Aparna Dilip Nageshwaran Palmer. She's the Chancellor of the University of Alaska Southeast in Juneau, with campuses in Juneau, Ketchikan, and Sitka within the Tongass National Forest. She leads UAS's strategic direction in budgeting, academics, student services, and community partnerships. Dr. Palmer holds a PhD in zoology from Washington State University and bachelor's degrees in biological sciences and English from Colorado State University. Her scientific research on the molecular genetics of tardigrades and sea worms. And she and her husband live in Juneau and enjoy exploring Southeast Alaska's resources. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Palmer.
Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you, Brian, for that wonderful introduction. And I also want to say welcome to all of you who do not live in Juneau, but are visiting Juneau for the Innovation Summit. And of course, a big welcome to everyone from Southeast Alaska, especially Juneau being here. Thank you for coming. In reflecting upon our keynote speaker, who I will introduce in a few moments, I was thinking about my personal geography, and I would invite you to think about your personal geography as Brian has invited you to do in terms of what brought you to Alaska. My personal geography begins in India. I was born in a small village, Srirangam, in South India. This village is on an island in the middle of a river, very isolated. From there, my family and I moved to Bengaluru, which is a large urban area in South India. And then when my parents, my sister and I decided to immigrate to the United States, we immigrated to the Denver area and lived in Aurora, Colorado for a few months before moving to Colorado Springs, Colorado. And then when I was ready to go to college, I went to Fort Collins, and as Brian mentioned, I went to CSU and received a couple of degrees there. From there, after meeting my husband, I like to joke that my best friend in college is now my husband. And so he and I moved to Brush, Colorado, which is Brush, Fort Morgan, which is in eastern Colorado. And that's where we got married. After that, we moved to Pullman, Washington, where I got my PhD. Then on to western Colorado, so rural western Colorado. I lived in Grand Junction, where we raised our son for about 22 years, eventually moving back near Fort Collins, Johnstown, Colorado, which is north of Denver, a small farming town. And then from Johnstown, I made it to Juneau. So, this is really nice to reflect on your personal geography because it makes you think, why was that my journey? How was that my journey? And how do I feel about that journey? Just a quick note about landing in Alaska. A little over 20 years ago, my husband and my son and I were hanging out in Grand Junction, Colorado. I had read an alumni magazine from my PhD institution and saw that one of my fellow graduate students had driven up to the Arctic Circle to collect some plants. And I thought to myself, you can drive to the Arctic Circle? And so I turned to my husband and my son and I said, let's drive to the Arctic Circle. I got a new Subaru that year, so we got into that Subaru and we drove up to the Arctic Circle. We drove up the Alaska Highway, went up to Fairbanks, drove north of Fairbanks, got to the Arctic Circle sign, parked our car, got out, were attacked by mosquitoes, got back in the car, put a full body netting on, and so our picture of ourselves at the Arctic Circle, you can't tell who we are. It's just a bunch of people in some nets. But I never forgot that trip. That trip took us to Fairbanks, to Anchorage, to Denali, to the Kenai Peninsula. And I thought to myself, someday I have to come back. This is the wildest and most beautiful place I have ever experienced in my life. And so about 23 years later, here I am. I saw an ad for a chancellorship at a beautiful little university in Juneau, Alaska. I thought, okay, I'm a marine biologist. It's by the ocean. I love mountains. There are mountains there. I'm going to apply. I interviewed on a very snowy day, just like today, and fell in love with it. And was lucky enough to get the job, and here I am 2.5 years later. So as I reflect upon that story, but also all of the places that I've lived, I realize that I've loved every single place that my husband and I have lived. And I ask myself, why? Why have I loved each place that I have been? And when I thought about it, and I've been reading Melody's book, I realized why. It's because in each place that we have lived, we have found something special through our exploration. Every single place that we've lived, we have explored, we've driven around, we've walked around, and we always find a place that we can drive to for coffee in the morning. My husband and I have coffee every morning together. He makes the coffee, we drive to a favorite place, we sit there and we dream about the day, we dream about our lives, we dream about the future. It's our time to dream. Every place that we have lived, I have gotten involved in the community. I love volunteering. I love being involved in the actions that make every community vibrant and beautiful. That's a way to find meaning as well. And then I am a biologist, love nature. My husband does as well. In each community, we have found where the trails are, how to get to those natural areas, how to explore and have adventures in nature. Here in Juneau, we've taken up sea kayaking, which has given us an even more wonderful way to explore our environment. As I look to the future, I think about something else that's related to place, which is that as the Chancellor of the university, I'm looking at an initiative that we have. We have dropped our out-of-state tuition differential. So we are now offering in-state tuition for everyone across the United States. And as a result of our initiative, the number of applications that we have received from out-of-state students has gone up about 25%. The number of students admitted to UAS from out-of-state has gone up 52%. So this fall, thank you. And I can't take credit for all of that. I have a great team. This fall, we're going to have students from all over the United States. Yes, a lot of them are from Pacific Northwest states, but a lot of them are from California, from Florida, from Texas, from Wisconsin, from Pennsylvania. And I'm thinking, like, how can I help them fall in love with Alaska, with Southeast Alaska, and become rooted here? I'll give you a quick percentage. 90% of the students who graduate from UAS stay in Alaska and are employed in Alaska within 1 year of graduation. With more out-of-state students coming in, because we primarily serve in-state students, I'm wondering what we can do to really help those students bond with Alaska and be rooted here. Which brings me to our keynote speaker today, who will help us answer that question. So it is my pleasure to introduce you to Melody Warnick. Melody is the author of 2 amazing books about how and where we choose to live. Her book, This Is Where You Belong, explores the science and practice of how we become attached to place. Her book, You Could Live Anywhere, examines how location-independent workers choose where to live and what communities can do to attract them and keep them there. Her work has appeared in many major publications, including the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Guardian, and she's been featured by Time, Fast Company, and Psychology Today. She's been a guest on NPR shows such as Life Kit, and she has appeared on Radio Australia. She is a speaker on how residents can build happier and more connected communities. her research and her practical insight and her really good sense of humor, if you read her books, really look at that question, what makes people stay, but what also makes them leave? So I think that's a great thing for us to examine today. Please help me welcome her to the stage.
Thank you, Dr. Palmer, for that great introduction. I love that she shared her Alaska story. Brian asked everyone yesterday to share your Alaska story, and I do not have an Alaska story because I am not from Alaska. I live in Virginia. But what I do have is a going to Alaska story, or maybe more specifically, a telling people that you're going to Alaska story. I speak in lots of places all over the country, and never have I had the kind of reaction as I have in the past few weeks telling people that I was coming to speak in Juneau. They were things like, do you need an assistant? Can I stow away in your luggage? One woman that I work with told me that her retirement plan is coming to Alaska. This is a person who is from Virginia, born and raised, her whole family is there, and yet she is serious about this. She has made multiple trips to Alaska. She said the last frontier for her is coming in winter and checking it out, which I would recommend. But people are captivated by this idea of Alaska. I looked at the statistics from the census around who is moving to Alaska and where they're coming from. And I found that Virginia is actually in the top 10 feeder states, along with other places that you might not expect, including Massachusetts, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas. So people are excited by the idea of Alaska. It almost sells itself. But because I have written a couple books about place, I love to hear those stories. I loved talking to everyone yesterday about how you ended up in Alaska. And I love talking to people about how they ended up anywhere and how they made those place decisions. I'm kind of obsessed, so when I ask you where you're from, like, I'm genuinely into it. It's not just a fill time sort of question for me. So I hear a lot of stories, and one couple that I talked to recently was a young couple named Josh and Solly. They were living in New York City. They were not from there. They were transplants there. But they were getting married, they were starting to think about starting a family, and they were feeling like they didn't really want to do that in New York. So they were considering other places. The two big places on their list that they were having a hard time deciding between were Detroit and Cleveland. Detroit because Josh was from Detroit, he still had some friends there, and Cleveland because Solly was from Cleveland, her mom lived there. They thought if they had kids that their mom would be able to help. But as we talked, and I asked them questions about what kind of place would really float their boat, what kind of place would allow them to do the things they love, their eyes kind of lit up, and they said, we love California. We love to ski, we love to surf. California would be a great place for that. And they knew it made no sense. They didn't have family there. They didn't have friends there. They knew it was really expensive. And that there was something about California that was calling to them. They wanted to go there. So we learn that people have sort of heart places, places that speak to them, even when it doesn't exactly make sense. Tom told us yesterday that not as many Americans are moving as used to, and yet 41% of Americans, according to a study by Pew, are fantasizing about it. They say they would move communities if they could. And I think a really interesting case study for that is remote workers. We obviously saw a massive boom in remote workers during COVID. 36 million Americans work remotely. That's about 22% of the workforce. And they are what I like to call Anywhereists. People who are not tied to a particular location by their job, and that gives them an immense amount of freedom to choose where they want to end up. I've talked to a lot of these people about how they make decisions about where to live, and it's interesting to see what that looks like for them. One couple did a year-long road trip around the country, spending a month in each of 12 places that were on their short list of possible locations where they wanted to move. I've seen lots of people, and I recommend this, make massive spreadsheets of qualities that they want in a place that they would consider, and they run the gamut from, I want to live in a place that has small independent theater, to I want to live in a place that doesn't have any tornadoes, to I want to live in a place that has a yarn shop because I love to knit. So I've even met people who literally opened a map and closed their eyes and put their finger down and ended up moving there. I don't recommend that particular approach. But what we find is that when you can move anywhere, you start to think a lot about what kind of place you want to end up in. One example of this is Joe and Anna Kukendall. They were living in Orlando, had been there for a few years, they had a young son, and after a while, Orlando started to seem crowded and expensive, and it just wasn't working for them. And so they did what most people do when they're starting to think about a relocation decision. They went online. Joe went down the internet rabbit hole, and when he came up, he had a new place in mind for them that he had never heard of before, except in the last 2 hours, and it was a place called the Shoals, Alabama. So how did he find the Shoals, Alabama? Because Joe and Anna were remote workers, and the Shoals was offering a program that would give $10,000 to remote workers who would relocate there. This is based on a really popular program that Tulsa, Oklahoma originated in 2018 called Tulsa Remote, where they offered $10,000 relocation bonuses to remote workers who would move to Tulsa and bring their job along. That was kind of the talent attraction bet. It used to be in economic development that you focus on attracting large companies, businesses that would come in and they would build their factories, and that would bring the people who needed jobs. But we've seen a huge shift in that economic developers are thinking more and more about speaking directly to people who are making relocation decisions. And this is one way that they do that. Tulsa Remote has been super successful. They've had 3,500 people relocate to Tulsa with their remote work, and they have a 75% retention rate. They've found that for every dollar they've spent on the program, Tulsa Remote, it brings $13 in economic benefits to their community. So it's been really successful, and of course has spawned a bunch of copycats. There's even a website called Make My Move that sort of catalogs these offers from different communities around the country. I love this one from a couple of counties in Kentucky that not only offers you cash for relocating, but they'll give you monthly locally sourced eggs, and you get to have lunch with the mayor of Mayfield, Kentucky, which I think is pretty awesome. So Anna and Joe found out about remote Shoals, and they decided to go do a visit. And in the end, it wasn't the money that attracted them. The money was just the thing that opened the door to awareness, that provided that initial bit of information. But at the end of the day, the thing that they fell in love with was this little community that seemed really friendly, that was walkable, that had a nice downtown, and that just struck them as the kind of place where they wanted to raise a family. So they moved there. I'm not saying that in order to attract talent to Alaska, you need to pay people to move here. I absolutely don't think that that's true. But it's interesting to think about how people make these decisions. like Kristen from Minneapolis, who when her job went remote, she got on the internet and ended up buying a house sight unseen in Southwest Virginia in a little town called Radford, and hated it once she got there. I don't recommend that approach either. Or then there was Amy and her husband, who were living in Seattle, working in the tech industry. When their jobs went remote, they said, why are we paying these really high prices to rent a little townhouse in Seattle? And what do we actually want? We want some land. We want some acreage. We want to grow food. And more than anything, they wanted backyard chickens. That was a deciding point for them. Where can we go that we can have backyard chickens? And so they ended up in Tennessee. I tell you these stories to say that humans are a little irrational about places. We talked about this with Tom's presentation yesterday, that people are trying to be practical. They're looking at things like, where are the jobs? What's the cost of living? What's the housing availability? But there's always this little undercurrent of, how can this place help me live my best life? How can this place help me realize my fantasies about myself? There is a lot of emotion in place decisions, and people think with, well, they're thinking about it, but they're also being led by their hearts. So I made a really practical place decision the last time I moved. I was living in Austin, Texas with my family. We had 2 kids, and we had gone there for a job. It was at the end of a period of moving fairly frequently. I'm from Southern California originally, but went off to Utah for college and got married at the end of college. And then my husband and I went on this jag of just moving around every few years. And I realized that we were moving for those life event moments that Tom talked about. We were moving because we got married. We were moving because we graduated from college, and we moved to Maryland for those first jobs out of college. Then we had a baby, and we moved into a house, and then we decided that the house was too expensive, so we moved back to Utah to be a little closer to family, and then we decided we wanted to be a little farther away from family. And so we moved to Iowa, and my husband went to grad school at Iowa State. And then he graduated, time to move again. Got to get that first job. And that's what took us to Austin. And we'd only been there for a couple of years. I was liking it. But my husband wasn't loving it so much. And so when he found a job ad for a dream faculty position at Virginia Tech in a tiny little town called Blacksburg in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Southwest Virginia, he said, I want to apply to this. I said, let's do it. Because I liked moving, actually. I liked the sense of newness. I liked the idea that every time you move, you have a clean slate. You are a brand new person, or at least that's what I was telling myself. That I'm going to move to this little town in Virginia, and it is going to be Mayberry. And I'm going to get to know all my neighbors, and I'm going to borrow the sugar, and I'm going to sit on my porch, and I am just going to be a totally brand new, better version of Melody when I get to Blacksburg. These were the things I told myself. And then we actually moved, and I realized that I had been totally delusional, because there were nice things about Blacksburg, but let's be honest, moving can suck. And we had moved to this place where we didn't know anyone. We had no friends, no family nearby. We didn't know our way around. I remember going to the hardware store in the first few days of being there, and the guy behind the counter had such a thick Southern accent that I felt like I needed subtitles. And I was like, where am I? And because we had moved so much for a few years, my response to this situation was to say, well, it's not working, clearly. So we need to just move again. You know, we came to the wrong place. And the only way to solve this is by picking up and relocating again. But we were brand new in this place. My husband had just started this new job. My kids were in school. My older daughter was in 5th grade at that point, and it was her 3rd elementary school in 3 states. She had just spent all this time memorizing the Texas State Pledge of Allegiance. They have that. They have their own. And now she was in Virginia and starting all over again. And I just thought, if we move again right now, we're looking at some serious future therapy bills. And I thought, I need to find a way to make this work. So the sociologist Richard Florida says that there are 3 kinds of people in the world based on their emotional relationship to their place. First are people who are mobile. They're moving fairly frequently. And we learned yesterday that there are periods of life where that's happening a lot, often in your 20s and 30s. And those people may or may not feel any connection to the place that they're living. They're moving frequently, and that was me for a long time. And then there's the second category of people who are stuck. They don't really like where they live, but they feel like because of jobs or financial circumstances or family circumstances, they can't move. They're trapped. And that was me too in Blacksburg, feeling like I am not into this, but I'm stuck here. I just have to figure this out. But then there is this unicorn third category of people who are rooted. So people who are rooted are the ones who not only are stable in their places, but who actually like where they live, love it, in fact, feel good there, feel connected. I started learning about this and realizing that I wanted to drink that Kool-Aid. I wanted to start feeling better about my life in Blacksburg, Virginia. And because I have been a journalist for most of my career, my response to these situations of, life crises is to look at what the research says. And so that's what I did, kind of dove into the research around place and how people relate to their places. And that's the first time that I ever came across this concept of place attachment, which is sort of a term that sociologists and psychologists and geographers use to describe that feeling of being deeply at home in a place, feeling like you belong in your community, feeling like this is where you want to be. It is very emotional. The only way to really measure it is to just ask people how they feel about their community. And so it kind of has this sort of touchy-feely vibe, and yet there is a lot of research that shows that place attachment is actually beneficial in concrete ways for people, that place attachment improves well-being, just simply a sense of peace and goodness in your life. People who are place attached tend to have higher levels of social capital, those relationships that help you accomplish your goals in your place. People who are place attached have higher levels of self-esteem, and I think that is related to a concept called place identity, that when you really love where you live, you see it as a positive reflection of yourself. It says something about you that you're from here. I see that a lot in the people I've met here at this conference from Alaska, that maybe more than most places I can think of, being from Alaska, choosing to live here, says something about you and who you are. And it makes sense that that is a big part of your identity. People who are place attached tend to be physically healthier. You're less likely to suffer a heart attack or a stroke if you have the relationships that are a product of place attachment. You're even more likely to live a little longer if you like where you live and you like the people around you. So place attachment is good for you, but it turns out it's also good for communities. The Knight Foundation partnered with Gallup on a study called Soul of the Community, and they talked to 26,000 people in communities across the country, from small towns like Milledgeville, Georgia, to big cities like Charlotte and Denver. And they asked people how they felt about their place, and then they looked at certain statistics about the place, and they found this rather surprising connection, that as place attachment rises in a community, so does local GDP. That when people in the community love it, the town tends to thrive economically. When I first saw that, I thought, this is like a chicken and an egg thing. Maybe it's just that people like living in places that are doing well, that aren't struggling financially. But John Clifton from Gallup says it's the other way around, that people who are place attached drive economic growth. Our theory is that when a community's residents are highly attached, they will spend more time there, spend more money. They're more productive and tend to be more entrepreneurial. So what is happening? Place-attached people behave differently. They behave in ways that are good for them spiritually, mentally, socially, physically, and they behave in ways that are good for their community. They're doing things like buying houses, starting businesses, shopping locally, eating locally, investing locally, donating locally. They're doing things that benefit communities and that make them better. So when we think about place attachment, we think about it as acts that you choose. Place attachment is the product of behaviors. And one thing that I like to think about place attachment is that when you're truly place attached, you see your place kind of through place attachment goggles, which are like beer goggles, but non-alcoholic. That you're just seeing your place with these lenses of affection and meaning and connection. So I'm going to show you a short video by the author John Green that I think shows you what place attachment can look like. He found someone online that was insulting his adopted home state of Indiana, and he went to the mat defending it.
You don't get views like this at your Target in Indiana, Rebecca.
Heard some people were talking shit about Indianapolis. Welcome to the 12th largest city in America. We've got beautiful canals.
And we got one of the best art parks in the country. Plus, it's free. Let's go check it out.
This one by Joop van Lieshout's probably my favorite, although I'm biased because my wife helped curate it and I put it in one of my books as a love letter to her. But you don't have to like art. Look at our wildflower gardens. We've also got some really excellent mountain biking and gravel biking. I mean, look at this. Gorgeous.
Yes, Indianapolis has all this to offer and so much more. Plus, our houses are like 3 times less than yours, but I'm glad you have a good view from your Target.
Boom. I love that. Even though that may have been Alaska that had the good view from the Target, I'm not sure, but I love that he lives in a place that maybe people don't think about a lot. Indianapolis, the great flyover of America. And yet he is willing to fiercely defend his place against all comers. And that is what place attachment looks like. It looks like loving your place despite what anyone else thinks about it, despite anyone else's opinions, and defending it. So, how attached are you to where you live? Before we go any further, I want to give you a chance to reflect on how this is showing up in your life. So I am going to give you a place attachment pop quiz. I will show you 10 statements, one at a time, and I just want you to keep track of how many times you agree with the statement for yourself, where you live right now. And you can, do hash marks on a piece of paper, or you probably have 10 fingers. You can do it that way. And then when we get to the end, we'll kind of see how you did and talk for a minute about what that means. 1, I feel comfortable here. 2, I know my way around. 3, the friendships I have with people in my community mean a lot to me. 4, I like to tell people about where I live. 5, I'm really interested in knowing what's going on here. 6, I can rely on people in this town to help me. 7, my town isn't perfect, but there are a lot of things that make me love it. 8, if something exciting were happening here, I'd want to be involved. 9, I care about the future success of my town. And 10, it feels like home. Okay, that was it. Take a second to tally up how you did out of 10. And let's see. Raise your hand if you scored a 7 or above. Okay, look around, guys. That was a lot of people. Raise your hand if you scored a perfect 10. Dude, that is a lot of perfect 10s for a single room. And it doesn't surprise me because you are at this conference today, right? You're a bit of a self-selected group. You are people who care enough about your community that you're here talking about economic development, talking about quality of life, talking about helping seniors age in place. You chose to come here. And maybe you came because this is your job, or maybe you came because you're an elected official, or maybe you just came because you're interested and you care. But place attachment is part of your why, or it should be, and it can be. That this is a motivating factor for why you're doing what you're doing, because you love it. It's that simple. Now, I am not going to ask people to raise their hand at the opposite end of the spectrum, the 1s and the 2s and the 3s and the 0s. But think about the fact that you probably know a few people who would score kind of low on that place attachment quiz. And that maybe there was a time in your life when your place attachment score wouldn't have been so great. That was definitely me when I moved to Blacksburg, because it didn't feel like home. And I didn't care about the future success of the town. And I didn't have friendships that were meaningful to me. But I wanted to. I wanted to change my situation in Blacksburg. And what I suspected was that place attachment is malleable, that it can change, and it does. It can be kind of a roller coaster over times. It's hardest when you're first new in a community, that it can take about 5 years for place attachment to peak for newcomers. But it's kind of always a little bit of a roller coaster. Place attachment goes up and down depending on things that are happening in our lives, depending on the weather, depending on all sorts of things. It is a constantly changing thing because it's emotional. And yet, what I learned from looking at the literature is that place attachment is correlated with certain behaviors, or that place-attached people engage in certain behaviors. And that became my thought, that if place-attached people behave like place-attached people, they do certain things that build place attachment, that I would start doing that too in Blacksburg, that I would make an effort to become one of those place-attached people. I am not a scientist. This was not a very scientific hypothesis, but I decided to put it to the test. And here's how I did it. I identified 10 broad behaviors that are correlated with place attachment. And I decided that for each of them, I would do what I called a love where you live experiment. This was just like a mini action step or a behavior change that I could do in my place that was designed to make me feel better about it, that was designed to help me fall in love with my community. So for instance, there's tons of research that shows that when you walk and bike in communities, you develop these mental maps that help you feel like this is your place, like you belong there. And so I started walking and biking more. There's research that shows that when you volunteer, it's just like really good for you and it's really good for your community. So I started volunteering at the local nonprofit historic movie theater. I went on hikes. I went to the farmer's market. I tried to become a regular at a local restaurant. That one failed miserably. And they were not all successes. But I realized that cumulatively, over time, these actions that were designed to develop place attachment actually did their job. They succeeded. I remember the moment that I kind of realized that it had been successful. I was riding my bike with my daughter. We were on the Huckleberry Trail, which is like a rails to trails path that goes through Blacksburg, and we were headed to two of my favorite places, the library and the farmer's market. And I just felt this sense of well-being wash over me. And I thought, I love it here. And then I thought, I don't want to move, which was crazy because I always wanted to move. I was kind of always looking for the next thing, the next place, the location that would heal me and make my life better and turn me into the person that I wanted to be. And yet, finally, I had decided that I could be at home in this community. And place attachment did that for me. So doing Love Where You Live experiments, and I talk in detail about all of them in my book, This Is Where You Belong. Doing Love Where You Live experiments is great for people like me who are a little type A and, self-motivated and like, I'm going to change this for myself, which not everyone is willing to do or not everyone is willing to think about. So it's also important to know that communities can build some place attachment infrastructure. And I don't mean physical buildings. I mean focusing on things that will help residents develop place attachment, even if they don't know what place attachment is. So that list of behaviors can be boiled down into a few broad categories that I'm going to talk about in the time that I have remaining. Connecting to people, connecting to place, connecting to purpose. And when we do that, we create belonging. And that supports talent attraction and retention too, by creating communities where people love to live, where you have a bench of fierce advocates for your community, and newcomers can see that and they can get immersed in it and develop their own place attachment. So you retain talent as well. So first, connect to people. In all the research about place attachment, I think nothing matters more than the relationships we have with other humans. It comes up again and again in the literature, and it comes up again and again anecdotally as well. I remember speaking at a conference in Virginia and having someone come up to me afterward and saying, I like a lot of things about the town where I live, but I don't have any friends, and so I'm probably going to move. And that is kind of the story of how place attachment works in communities, that if you don't have relationships with other people to lock you in place, you will not want to stay very long. And that's a challenge because we are in a peak period for loneliness in the United States. 61% of adult Americans say they feel lonely always or sometimes. And 50% of people don't know or trust their neighbors. This is a big shift in our society from the way things used to be. When you look back at the 60s and 70s, and a lot of people were having bunco parties with their neighbors. Now we would prefer not to speak with our neighbors most of the time. So when I was in Blacksburg and thinking about how do I start developing relationships with people, I started with my neighbors. And I started with the most basic thing you can imagine, which was taking some banana bread to the neighbors that lived around my house. And I can tell you that people like banana bread. And they respond to it. The neighbor across the street, we had never talked to him. He looked like this kind of scary dude. He was so excited to get some banana bread. He told us all about the history of our house. We had a great conversation with him. Our next door neighbors responded by inviting us to dinner. We developed a relationship of trust with them. And it wasn't that we were BFFs or hanging out all the time, but I knew I had a good relationship with them because one day I was stuck at a doctor's appointment and I knew my daughter, who was then in first grade, was gonna be getting off the bus and I wouldn't be home to open the door for her. So I texted my next door neighbor and said, "Can Ruby come over to your house?" And she said, "Sure." And that was it, like we didn't necessarily hang out a lot, but we had that relationship of trust that I think helps people feel a sense of community where they live. So one thing I noticed in talking to people at the conference yesterday is there are a surprising number of boomerangs. And by boomerangs, I mean people who lived in Alaska at some point, maybe as a kid, and went away, sometimes for a while, and eventually came back. Raise your hand if you are one of those boomerangs, someone who lived outside and then returned. Okay, quite a few of you. I think that's an opportunity for Alaska in terms of talent attraction. So Greensboro, North Carolina, started a program called Boomerang Greensboro designed to do exactly this, to attract back people who had once lived in Greensboro as kids, as college students, as adults, and to entice them back to a place where they already had some of those relationships. They had friends. They had some emotional connections to the town. They started an ad campaign that had 26,000 impressions. And when people requested more information, they sent them a box of Greensboro-related goodies. Of all the people who got in touch with them, 100 families actually relocated back to Greensboro. And it works better as a talent attraction strategy maybe than just trying to get anyone, because you're bringing home people who already have some of those relationships, family and friends, that help them feel place attachment right away. I heard this yesterday from Marty Lang about his Alaska story. We always felt drawn back home. Finally, we made the decision that it's time to go back to Alaska. I think he was out of Alaska for 30-something years. But it was always kind of there in his mind, in his heart, and when he had an opportunity, he came back. So that's something to consider in Alaska, is reaching out specifically to people who've already been here. But for people who haven't been here, for people who are transplanting to Alaska without a lot of prior connections, the goal is to get them connected quickly. So Iowa City, Cedar Rapids started a program to do just that. They called it the Wingman Program. They got a core of volunteers who lived in the community, and when someone got in touch, someone who was moving to Iowa City or Cedar Rapids, they would connect them with a wingman who was sort of like an ambassador for the community. And this person would agree to have one lunch out with them, to take them to 2 networking events, and to introduce them to 3 friends. That's it. They weren't committing to being their best friends for life, but they were committing to helping people make that transition into the community quickly. I know that Anchorage has an ambassador program that's kind of doing a similar thing. If you want to move here, we'll connect you with someone who can tell you what's great about it and hopefully start introducing you to friends. I think programs like these that help people integrate socially, integrate into the social fabric, are where you start to retain talent because people are building place attachment more quickly. And it matters. One researcher found that when he looked at communities that were affected by the 2011 Japanese earthquake and tsunami, communities that had higher levels of social connectedness before the tsunami had higher survival rates during the tsunami. And what happened is that people knew their neighbors. And they knew that so-and-so in that house was elderly and they were going to need a little help getting up the hill. And they were willing to help them because they knew them and they liked them and they were connected with them. Call this the Mr. Rogers principle. Won't you be my neighbor? That neighbors can connect with each other. And I heard yesterday Kathy from Cordova talk about how their community is going all in on social events, on festivals like the Copper River Delta Shorebird Festival and the Cordova Fungus Festival. Those kinds of things are great for visitors, but they're also great for residents because they give everyone an opportunity to be together, to foster those social connections, and to feel like even in a community of 2,000 people, you like being around these people, you trust them, and you want to be connected with them. So that is the power of quickly connecting people to other people when they are newcomers to a community. It's a really quick way and an important way to build place attachment. So next, connecting people to their place. When I was researching place attachment and trying to build it in myself with these Love Where You Live experiments, I had this kind of mantra, which was every town is good at something. Do what your town is good at. And for me, that turned out to be becoming a fan of Virginia Tech Hokie football. Tom mentioned yesterday being a college football fan. I was not. I was one of those people who was like, what's happening? I don't understand this game. But when I moved to Blacksburg, Virginia, home of Virginia Tech and the Hokies, I realized that this was a big deal in my town. And not just for people who were associated with the university or students. It kind of was a big deal for everyone during the fall. And I decided that if I wanted to feel like a local, I needed to act like a local. And that meant going to a Hokie football game and literally buying the t-shirt, right? Like buying the Virginia Tech t-shirt and embracing this. It didn't feel normal at first. It felt like a little bit of fakery. Like, I don't really care about this. But what I found is that when I went and I just opened myself up to this experience, I ended up really liking it. Not the football part so much, but they play Metallica's Enter Sandman when the team runs onto the field and everyone jumps up and down. And it's this amazing ritual of collective effervescence that makes you feel like you're part of a community. I've noticed that sports can be kind of a good metaphor for place attachment, that when people are sports fans, they don't talk about they won, those people. We say we won, like I was out there with them. And that is how place attachment works too, that when we're truly fans of our place, we feel like we are part of the team. We're all working together and the town's win is my win. So June Lee Wang realized when she moved from California to Minneapolis, Minnesota, that she didn't feel like a local for a long time, and part of that was it's just cold. And you can laugh because you have more on the cold front than Minnesota does, but climate is a big issue, right? Like, it's not for everyone. But what June Lee discovered is that one day, after having been there for several years, she went to an Eddie Bauer and she bought one of those hats that are furry and have ear flaps, like an Elmer Fudd hat. And it immediately changed her experience of living in a cold place. She felt warm for the first time in years. And she felt angry at all the people from Minnesota who hadn't let her in on this secret that proper headgear was the key to surviving a Minnesota polar vortex. She wanted to spread the word that was important. And so she started a program called Minneapolis Hello. And that is literally what they do. is they have a monthly ceremony where newcomers to the Twin Cities can come and get their hat. We give you your hat that is going to help you feel better about living in a cold place. And it's really changed people's perspectives. One participant had already been in Minnesota for 3 years, but when they found out about the MSP Hello program, they knew they had to go because they didn't feel yet like a local, and this felt like the way to become a local. So for June Lee, this is a retention issue. Minnesota, she said, has a huge problem with retention of professionals. Now that the city understands part of our job, part of our institution's job, is to welcome people, not just be passive. So part of welcoming people is telling them the secrets of how you start to feel comfortable living here. So one thing that we talked about universities this morning, and one thing that has worked in Hastings, Nebraska, home to Hastings College, is giving students gift cards to downtown businesses so that they explore more and they start to feel like a local. They connect with the actual place that they're living in. But I'm not sure that that is the secret for Alaska, because I heard Maureen Hall say this yesterday. The secret sauce to getting your kids and your grandkids to stay or to move back to Alaska is getting them outdoors into this beautiful land. They're not going to bond with this place if they don't have those experiences. And as I've talked to people at this conference about their Alaska stories, the thing I hear over and over again, more than anything else, is I love the outdoors. I love nature here. I love spending time outside. I'd almost say that if you're not one of those people, you might have a hard time feeling at home in Alaska. But that doesn't mean that it's easy to figure it out. I was at a table last night for dinner where a local, and I know she's in the room right now, so I apologize for sharing this. A local admitted she'd never been halibut fishing, and there was shock at the table, let me tell you. And I need you to understand that halibut fishing is not a thing anywhere else. I did not know that that was, maybe key to feeling like a true Alaskan, is having that experience or experiences like it. But you need to think about, what are the experiences newcomers need to have in order to truly feel like they belong here? Like this is their place. Amy Bushats was someone that I interviewed for my second book, If You Could Live Anywhere, because she was an Anywhereist. And Anywhereists are not always remote workers. Sometimes they're retirees, entrepreneurs, people like teachers and doctors and lawyers whose careers can kind of unfold anywhere. And they get to these sort of decision-making points, inflection points in their lives where they need to choose a new place. And for her, she and her husband, they were a military family, had moved all over. And at the point where her husband was retiring from the military, they had to choose where to go next. Where did they want to live? Now that they could choose for themselves. And the thing that was in their mind was, we need to live someplace that has great access to the outdoors. So they chose Alaska. They weren't really connected here, didn't have those friends and family relationships, but they really wanted that identity for themselves. Sometimes our place choices are a little aspirational. We choose a place that we see as reflective of the kind of person we want to be, if maybe not the kind of person we already are. And so Amy and her family moved to Alaska. And she realized relatively quickly that being outside in Alaska wasn't like being outside in the lower 48. She said, I realized that if I waited for the weather to be nice, I would never go out. And so she set a goal for herself that she would go outside every day, at least for a little bit, no matter what the weather was. That took some learning. she had to get some new gear. She had to figure out how to do this. And one thing that helped her was joining a running club where people could give her advice about how can you safely and successfully spend time outside doing outdoorsy things in Alaska. So this is what I mean by connecting people to place and helping them feel like a local. And I think that might matter more in Alaska than it does in other places, because I know that this is a little bit of a different place to live. You have secrets. You have tricks of the trade of making a life work in Alaska. Are you sharing those things with newcomers, either in formal or informal ways? How can you help your newcomers, the talent you're attracting to Alaska, feel like they belong here and feel like they know how to live here? Because that's what's going to help them become place attached and help retain them. So last, connecting people to purpose. Ethan Kent from Placemaking X said, the cities that succeed are the ones that allow people to help create them. That's how they become better places, but also how people are going to become more attached to them. In order for people to truly feel a sense of place attachment, a sense of belonging, they need to invest locally. And that act of investment, which is a place attachment behavior, helps people feel invested. And I say invested, I don't mean financially. I just mean emotionally and maybe in terms of time and energy. You choose to do things that will make your community better. So when I wanted to do this in my hometown of Blacksburg, Virginia, I thought we should start a sidewalk chalk festival. And I had seen it in another place that we lived in Texas, and I thought, we don't have anything like that. That would be so cool. And I realized starting a festival from scratch is really hard. I think there are probably people in this room who have done that exact thing. So you know, it ended up being more like a sidewalk chalk activity at the farmer's market. And yet, seeing people draw on the pavement, I thought, I made something happen. That didn't exist before I tried to do it. And I think that matters. One thing that I've learned talking to you all is that I've heard people say Alaska is like a small town. You're never more than 2 degrees of separation away from anyone else in the state. And that makes it easier to get involved and easier to make things happen. So I want to tell you a story about Fargo, North Dakota, and a guy named Greg Tavine who grew up there. And if you've heard of Fargo, you've probably heard of the movie. And if you've seen the movie, then you know that this is what people think of when they think of Fargo. It's not the mental image you want associated with your town. For Greg growing up there, even before the movie came out, he sometimes felt like Fargo was the butt of a joke, that people are like, oh, you're from North Dakota, geez. And so when he graduated from high school, he took off, went to college out of state, started traveling, had no intention of coming back. And then one day he was in Europe and he looked around and he's like, I don't know anyone here, but in Fargo, I know everyone. And he decided to come back. And when he came back, he decided that he and his friends would invest, they would engage, and they would try and make Fargo a better place to live. So they started with the low-hanging fruit. They started a farmer's market. Fargo didn't have one at that time. And then a group started an open streets, which is 3 times a summer. They close the downtown streets to cars and traffic and open it up to pedestrians and cyclists, and it's everyone's favorite events of the summer. They started an alley fair. They had a downtown that had these alleys behind the buildings, and someone said, you know what? We should start an alley fair to kind of highlight these weird little places that no one thinks about. And they just did it. They also started the Fargo Canoe Parade. The Red River runs through Fargo, but it was just kind of a water source that people didn't really spend time on. And they decided to draw attention to the presence of the river by inviting people to canoe down it in a parade. And it has grown year after year. The effect of all this is that Fargo has become magnetic for attracting and retaining talent in a weird place, Fargo, North Dakota. But when I was there last, I talked to the school superintendent who said they used to survey graduating seniors, and almost everyone said, we're out of here, we're leaving, we have no intention of living in Fargo. But since Fargo has started changing its identity and making Fargo into a great place to live, more students say they want to stay or they want to go away to college but then return. Fargo is becoming the kind of place that people want to live despite maybe its reputation. So I talked a little before about how when you're engaged with your community, place attachment can become part of your why. It gives you a reason for doing it. And there's a dark side to having jobs or volunteer gigs or elected positions that allow you close contact with your community. And that is that you become really familiar with what's not going well. You know better than anyone the challenges that your community faces. You may have contact with cave people, Citizens Against Virtually Everything. And that can be a struggle. But when you're engaged in this work of making your place better, trying to fix some of the problems you see in your communities in Alaska, you can remember that you're doing it because you love it here, because you were one of the high scorers probably on the place attachment pop quiz. And when you have those days where you say, why am I living here when we have so many problems? You can remember you're living here because you love it and you can choose it every day. I love to see people choose their place. And sometimes that happens in really colorful, visible ways, like yarn bombing a bike rack, or remaking an empty lot into a parklet, or painting a crosswalk, or putting a piano downtown. These are what Peter Kageyama, another place expert, calls love letters to your city, sort of visible signs that someone here loves this place, is invested in its success, wants a joyful community. One guy named Tim Schneider made these little styrofoam eyeballs, and he just put them around his town on different objects. And there's really no reason to do that other than you just want your community to be a little more joyful. And that's maybe the end game of place attachment, right? That you have some joy in the place where you live and you want other people to have a little joy as well. So the Soul of the Community study that I referenced earlier found that when it surveyed all these people in all these different communities, the city of Grand Forks, North Dakota scored #1 in the survey on measures of social offerings, meaning that the people who lived there thought it had a lot to do and, just fun things going on all the time. And there were other cities in the survey that I think, objectively speaking, you can say have more than Grand Forks. Grand Forks clearly doesn't have the beaches of a Miami or the sports arenas of a Charlotte or the ski slopes of a Denver. And yet, when it comes to place attachment, that doesn't matter. What matters to place attachment is simply the perception that your town is a great community and that a lot of things are going on there. So I want to close by sharing 2 quick videos that I think exemplify what that looks like when you see your town without the place attachment goggles versus when you see them with place attachment.
times in Cleveland again. Still Cleveland. Come on down to Cleveland town, everyone. Under construction since 1868. See our river that catches on fire. It's so polluted that all our fish have AIDS. We see the sun almost 3 times a year. This guy has at least 2 DUIs. The flats look like a Scooby-Doo ghost town. Don't slow down in East Cleveland or you'll die.
So that's Cleveland. I made the mistake of showing that video one time when I presented in Cleveland. They did not like it. It was not great. So that's the video you make when you don't have place attachment and you're only seeing the annoying, terrible Scooby-Doo ghost town sort of parts about your community. But then someone shared with me this next video, which is also about Cleveland.
I've seen the river burning, white sails shining off the emerald coast. I watched a star being born on stage, God's behind glass at the Hall of Fame. I've heard the sax man flatter downtown streets, captivating sounds of brass, wind, and strings. I've stood in the shadow of peace, beneath stone guardians protecting hope's fleet. I wandered through a tunnel at the bottom of the sea, over the edge to the streets beneath.
That's the same place as the first video. It's kind of crazy. And yes, there were higher production values in that second video. I think it probably cost a little more money to produce. But what you realize is that every place kind of has both those stories going on, right? If I wanted to make a video like the first one about my hometown in Blacksburg, I absolutely could. You probably could too, about where you live. We have both of those stories because we also have the second story too, the great things that are happening in our community. And when we're place attached, we start sharing that story with other people. It is part of our advocacy for our community. So the little eyeballs won't fix real problems, I recognize. And we've talked in this conference about a lot of the real problems, lack of housing, lack of employment opportunities, lack of childcare. These are serious issues that people in this room are actively working on. But as you do so, I hope that you'll remember that you're doing it because you care about this place and that it's worth caring about wherever you live in Alaska, that this is a place that is worth being attached to. Place-attached people behave differently. You behave differently just by being here today. But I hope you'll think about other things you can do to behave more like a place-attached person in your life, that you can develop some of your own love where you live experiments to become more attached to your community, and you can think harder about what will help other people who are new or thinking about moving here attach as well. Because when we love our places, they love us back. Thank you.